give her a huge hand. Thank you guys. I want to tell you, I am so proud of you. I'm proud of us. El Paso, this city is so cool, and I want you guys to realize how cool it is. I've not met, maybe in the past, I mean every week, I think I meet somebody who has moved here to our city, not because they've had to or their job brought them here, but because they've wanted to, they've chosen to. Two of whom I want to introduce you to right now. You've been listening to them for the last hour, and they were iconic, are iconic musicians in Chicago. They worked at the Chicago Old Town School of Folk Music, a great, wonderful music school. You probably all have heard of it. 7,000 students come in and out of those doors every year. They chose, yeah, that's right. They chose to take their lives and move them to the border because they wanted to live in El Paso. They wanted to build here in El Paso what they built in Chicago. And they make a lot of money. They're iconic musicians, and they've come here. They moved here last Tuesday to start a school above Cinco Puntos Press, which you will see and hear a lot about, I'm sure. The Carambola, Stephanie, the Carambola Community Music Center, is that it? The Carambola Community Music Center. Can anybody tell me what a Carambola is? I didn't know till last week. Somebody told me in Albertsons. I was buying some vegetables, Ray. It's that five-star pointed fruit that you see in Albertsons. That's a carambola. It also means serendipity. All right, and so all of this came together, and they're starting this music school. It shows you what a great city you live in, and it's happening week after week. I meet all these wonderful people moving here, some of whom are in our congregation tonight as well. So big hand for the music, Maria and Javi. Thank you, Maria and Javi. I would like to hand the mic off to Susan to get this thing started. Susan, thank you so much for hosting.
Hi guys, thank you for joining me here in my garden, and thank you so much to Steve and Tracy that we've been working like busy little bees all day. Just a few logistics. This is kind of a little different maybe than most events we attend. We're going to have a whole great amount of time, a great time tonight. We've got lots of libations, lots of food, lots of friends, lots of laughter, but we've got two very, very special folks. Folks that represent our border, represent the history of this region, that are going to talk about it in a very special, meaningful way, and we need to kind of show them respect during their presentations. This door here is going to be locked, so if you need to get inside to get more food or to use the restrooms, please use that side door, so there'll be no interference with Ray or Kiki as they're speaking. But again, thank you so much for coming. I do want to remind you as well that Steve and I and Tracy feel passionately about our community, and we are, as all of you are, trying to give back. And two of the charities that we are involved with are the T.O. Cooper Memorial Scholarship Foundation, which gives scholarships to El Paso High students, and the El Paso Library Foundation. And there's little goldfish bowls inside. If you feel like giving us a little contribution, that would be swell. But let's get started.
Susan and I have been speaking and talking and discussing this night for many months. As soon as Ray had come out with his book and Kiki had published his, we thought, wow, Caballero and Cooper in one night on one stage. All right, the big read. Now, I don't know what's going to happen tonight. All right, this is about the early 1900s. And it's been the subject of vigorous discussion amongst many historians, one of whom I'm going to introduce right now, okay? And Caballero and Cooper, I don't know. Stephanie, they might disagree on some points. And lest there...
I've never seen them disagree.
Well, they haven't, and they've said that, but lest there be maybe a fight or something break out on stage, I thought, no, I say keep it right here. I just thought we needed, Susan and I have talked about this, and we thought we need a moderator. We need an MC, maybe a referee. All right, we're not sure what you're going to see tonight, but this is the first time ever attempted. I'm calling it the big read, okay, Caballero against Cooper. But I have to introduce one of my favorite people, again, someone who moved to El Paso, and by choice. We're lucky to have him, and he's a great historian. And he works at the University of California, Santa Cruz. No, Santa Cruz.
It's a great school.
Great school. And so he's got it back and forth, but we hope to get him here permanently in some way, maybe elected office one day, I'm not sure. As his wife will soon be, as the next state representative. How about a big hand for Lena Ortega? Thank you, Lena. Yes, his wife will. But big hand, give it up for Mark Sayak Ortega. Mark, it's your job to keep this clean tonight.
I don't know, Steve. I hadn't thought of myself as a referee. The talks tonight are dear to the heart of all historians. We love to investigate revolutions and wars, and it's because a year in which nothing happens is a boring year. But a year in which a revolution breaks out or a war breaks out is a year in which society falls apart. And for a rare moment, you can look inside the inner workings of a culture or society and see what you normally do not ever get to see. And there's wonderful moments and there's horrific moments. It's the whole kind of experience, the whole human experience gets kind of bottled up in one specific kind of event. And of course, the event we're going to be talking about today is the Mexican Revolution, which is really dear to the hearts of all El Pasoans. I mean, you can talk about revolutions and the revolutions across the world for the last 400 years, but there's only been one revolution which took place as much outside its country as it did inside its country, and that was the Mexican Revolution. And there's only one city outside the country of the origin of revolutions that's ever played such a central role in the revolution. This is one-time only event, El Paso. El Paso's role in the Mexican Revolution was absolutely central to all the events that unfolded. And so we're going to have two different views from one side where somebody is participating in the revolution, and one side from somebody who is experiencing the revolution. But I can tell you, one of the things we're going to learn tonight is that we historians have it easy. It's really fun to investigate a revolution. It's really horrific to be in the middle of one. So let's start then with Ray Caballero, who really needs no introduction. The mayor, our former mayor of El Paso, longtime wonderful resident and attorney here, and as near as I can tell, he actually rode with Pascual Orosco. I'm convinced he has a more intimate knowledge of Pascual, as he calls him, than anybody I have ever come across in my life. Ray.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Al and Susan Urbieta, can you hear me, Al? You're okay? Okay, Susan Urbieta, thank you very much for hosting this very wonderful event, and two wonderful beneficiaries of this event. First, the Theo Cooper Foundation, helping kids at El Paso High, and next, the El Paso Public Library Foundation. Let me put a plug for the library here, okay? By the time that I became mayor, the library was running into some tough times. They were down to 36 hours a week being open, which is a disgrace for a community. As a heavy user of libraries myself, those are wonderful institutions in all communities, and we have a very special library ourselves. The photograph you see up here is courtesy of the El Paso Public Library. And it has a wonderful photographic collection, as UTEP does. Claudia Rivers and Juan, who are here representing UTEP. Those in being in libraries, one of the reasons that got me involved in reading quite a bit about the Mexican Revolution. My family also, of course, like a lot of families from around here, came from the Mexican Revolution. My mother, you could say, is a product, in one way of speaking, of the Orozco Rebellion of 1912. Her parents crossed as a result of that rebellion. They crossed over in April of 1912. The whole brood did. My grandfather brought my grandmother. My grandmother did not declare at customs that she was pregnant 8 months worth with my mother. and gave birth to my mother on South Stanton Street in a dwelling about 100 years ago. So really, I can thank Pascual for a few things. Pascual Orosco, how many of you have heard of Pascual? Other than the fact you got the invitation to come to this meeting. A few. Okay. He should be known on the same level as Pancho Villa, and he's not. Why isn't he? Well, Pancho Villa was the greatest military hero ever produced, well, actually the greatest hero of any kind ever produced by Chihuahua, and the greatest military hero of the Mexican Revolution, and yet most people are ignorant when you mention his name. They don't know it. Why is that? I'm going to tell you in a little while why his history is so obscure. Orozco, in my opinion, to use the words often used by Judge Spiesny, is a sine qua non. He is that without which. In other words, if it had not been for Pascual Orozco, Madero would not have won the revolution, Madero would not have been the president of Mexico, and probably some continuation of Diaz would have gone on. But it wouldn't have turned out the way it did turn out. At the time that anyone started really hearing about Pascual Orozco, it was 1910. Let's set the scene, the table in that year. Porfirio Diaz was just completing 30-some years in office as president of Mexico, where he carried on as a dictator in a very brutal and arbitrary manner. It was an extremely corrupt regime, through and through corrupt. We talked today about the 1% or the 99%. Well, the 1% was even smaller back then, and they were really taking unto themselves much more of the wealth. Porfirio Diaz promised stability, he promised security, and he promised progress and modernization for Mexico. And some can say that he actually brought that. But few in Mexico shared that. What happened in Mexico, everybody knows, back in the days especially, was 96% agricultural nation. 96% of the people didn't own any land in an agricultural nation. 90% of the indigenous communities lost their common lands. There was an enormous land grab. The scope of the law, the intent of the law was to create what we know over here as Jefferson's yeoman farmers, where each person was supposed to own a little plot of land, and that would make him a better citizen. But what happened over there is that they took the land from these communities, mostly indigenous, and then they allowed the already very wealthy and large corporations and some Americans to purchase these lands at pennies, 2 cents an acre. Almost nothing. At the same time, they were denying Mexicans the right to own land and were taking lands that their families had worked for 100 or 200 years. They were turning them over to these large corporations. You all have heard about the King Ranch, being good Texans. We know about the King Ranch because it is the symbol in Texas of a large spread, a huge ranch. That has 800 and some odd thousand acres. Luis Terrazas, the biggest hacendado in Chihuahua, had spreads in Chihuahua 7 times the size of the King Ranch. 7 times. That's one guy. Hearst. Y'all have heard of Hearst? William Randolph? Well, his father was a U.S. Senator. Sight unseen. He bought a 900,000 acre ranch at Babicora. And there were others like that. You hear these names. These are good friends. Some of them, like the Ted Houghton, for example, his whole family, the Corralitos Ranch. Those are good people, but they own these monster spreads that American corporations were allowed to own. It's nothing wrong with that, but taking them away from Mexicans and not allowing Mexicans to own their own country, that was the sin of the Porfiriato. And it went on like that. The corruption was absolutely rampant. You couldn't get anything The same people who had political power. This is a tough crowd doing it with the rain. Look at them. You look great out there. I'm proud of you. I'm telling you, you'd think we were in Oregon or something. But the you got to take a picture the other way around instead of taking one of me. That's an even better picture of what I'm looking at right here. This is wonderful. This is wonderful. So anyway, you can see what's happening in Mexico. That sets the scene. There was a tremendous amount of discontent. The people of Northwest Chihuahua are very different kinds of people. These are people, many of them are mule skinners. They are miners. They are vaqueros. A lot of them. These are people who know how to use guns. They've used them all their life. They grow up around them. These are people who they're like a ready-made cavalry. They go out into the sierra. These are people who know how to fight bandits. That's what they do. These are not people you want to trifle with. Diaz trifled with them. He took their land away from them. He was mistreating them. The rural police constabulary, those people were abusing and being very arbitrary toward the people. And so there was an enormous amount of discontent, except that little tiny group that I was telling you about. So even among the very rich people, such as Francisco Madero, who comes from one of the wealthiest families in Coahuila, even he was upset. So Francisco Madero says, we need democracy to come back to Mexico. And he did. He ran against Porfirio Diaz for the presidency. Well, Diaz let it go on for just a little bit, but a few days before the election, he had Madero arrested on trumped-up charges, put into prison. The election was fixed, as it always was, and that was the last time that Porfirio Diaz was elected. So as we come into 1910, he has a fresh new 6-year term. Porfirio Diaz does. Madero was in prison, and they start celebrating the 100th birthday of Mexico from the call of her independence on September 16th of 1810. Big celebrations, 115 years ago. And then Madero finally, pretty pacifist kind of a guy, in prison, finally, after the people have been telling him for a long time, you're never going to change Diaz without a revolution, he finally gets the idea that maybe we're never going to change Diaz without a revolution. And so he finally gets out, he escapes, and he goes to San Antonio and he writes his plan, and he says, I want this nation to rise up in revolt on November the 20th of 1910, which was only about 6 weeks away from the time he declared that. Very short time. And so November 20th came, and all over Mexico there were these uprisings, little revolts here and there. By the end of the month, by the time December rolled around, they were all extinguished. They were all gone, except one. Right over here in San Isidro, a little village near Ciudad Guerrero, right on the edge of where the Sierra is, a group of 19 men led by Pascual Orosco Jr., then only 28 years old, set out on their part to do the revolution. The only office that Pascual, who never served a day in the military, never had any office before, it was just because this village basically pointed he was the guy. When they set out, most of them, by the way, were Methodists. Okay? Very interesting. They're almost all cousins. They're almost all cousins. Now, I don't want the Methodists here to start revolting or anything, but I'm just telling you that you do have that in your blood, okay, somewhere. So anyway, they left that little town, these 19 guys, most of them are cousins, brothers-in-law and so forth, and old family friends. They left and they started attacking Diaz installations. And they attacked 11 or 12 times over the course of some weeks. But guess what? That was virtually the only place where that was happening. And the fact that that was the only place where that was happening, that these were the only men in the nation who were taking the fight to Diaz, that became the battleground. And even though this guy was just the consensus leader in a tiny village, by the time the revolution caught on and men, one after the other, came to this group and joined them and wanted to fight with them, in a day they already had 165. They had hundreds after a while. All of them under whom? Under this 28-year-old mule skinner. To the point where he became the national military leader in the Mexican Revolution. And this guy had eyes really for one goal, Ciudad Juarez. He knew that if he took Ciudad Juarez, that's where the arms were, there was money there, it was a symbolically large place, and so they attacked Ciudad Juarez. Madero was head of the forces, but Pascual was really the leader. Madero tried to back out a number of times. He called off the attack. He said, go south, get out of here. He could have put up with another term for Diaz. But kind of in a very surreptitious way, Villa and Orozco, really Orozco was above Villa, Orozco was the guy, they basically ordered the attack on Ciudad Juarez against the permission of Madero. After 3 days of battle, Diaz forces were defeated. Orozco becomes this huge, or as somebody we know right now would say, huge hero, monster guy in Mexico, the most important guy, the most popular man in Mexico is Pascual Orozco. Wow. Madero becomes president. Within days, Diaz resigns the presidency, hops on a ship, and goes to an exile in Paris, never to return. Wow. That was the end of that dictatorship of 34 years. And Pascual Orozco was the guy that brought that about. But I have to digress here to tell you that there were really two revolutions. There was the political revolution that addressed political grievances, the dictatorship, fraudulent elections, denial of civil rights, on and on. But then there was this other revolution was the socio-economic revolution, the revolution where people were complaining about labor. They wanted labor reform. They wanted land reform. They wanted the lands that had been taken away from them to be returned to them. Madero, as president, only wanted to address the political grievances. He was not, at least at that time, interested in addressing the socioeconomic complaints that people had. And that caused him a lot of problems. Because a lot of these folks, they didn't think they got involved in the revolution and not get their land back. They didn't think they got into a fight and not get appropriate labor reforms. That's not what they were fighting for. To put Madero in, they don't know Madero. Madero had hardly taken the oath of office when immediately there's a cascade, a whole bunch of revolts all over Mexico by the left side. These people who wanted reform, who wanted their land back. Probably the most well-known of them is Emiliano Zapata in the south of Mexico. Immediately rose up. Of course, his was land reform. Guess who Emiliano Zapata appointed as the chief of his revolution, even though he had never met him? Pascual Orozco. You could have guessed that, right? Very smart group, Susan. Very smart, very good. So, on the north, the Magonistas, watch out, you're all right. There was a little drip right behind you. Yeah, be careful. Okay. So, right in the north, the Magonistas, very left-wing sort of people who wanted labor reform and so forth, they also revolted. All of them were looking to Pascual Orozco. He was the consensus leader. But Pascual was still working for Madero. But 6 months later, he wasn't. In March 1912, Orozco finally rose up in rebellion against Madero. Everyone thought he was going to win and march to Mexico City. And he basically says, I'm here and I'm going to march to Mexico City and we're going to take over this country. A funny thing happened though. The United States got involved and called an arms embargo. The first one they really enforced. And Pascual was starved of weaponry. And without those weapons, even though he had a lot of money, which I'll explain right now, he couldn't make it. So at that point, Pascual, without weapons, failed by September. He only lasted 6 months. But he did something in that rebellion. At the same time that he made alliances with left-wing people, and he claimed at all times to be fighting for reform, he made a very close alliance with the oligarchy in Chihuahua, the same people who had taken the land away from folks, the same people who wanted a return of Porfirio Diaz. Those very rich guys thought that Pascual, they hated Madero, they wanted Madero out, and they thought that Pascual Orozco would be the vehicle to allow them to depose Madero. And so here he is trying to say he's a reformer on one side at the same time that he's fighting with the oligarchy on the other side. That's what made Pascual Orozco a paradox. It also is what made him extremely controversial. So his revolution, as I told you, was over in September of 1912. He kind of goes and does the guerrilla thing for a while. He gets lost for a while. And then in February of 1913, something very important happened. In February of 1913, Huerta and the army rebelled against Madero. They overthrew him in a coup d'etat, and they assassinated him. And they assassinated the vice president. This was an event that totally traumatized and shocked the Mexican nation. Madero became like a saint. And right after that, guess who joined Huerta? Pascual Orozco. Huerta being an ogre, the most hated man in Mexico, and here's the man of reform joining hands with Huerta. He then goes from being controversial to being hated. And after a year and a half, Huerta, of course, took over the presidency. He instituted a dictatorship. He tried to get things back going like they were under Porfirio Diaz. But he only lasted a year and a half because the United States opposed him also. And that's when Villa and Obregón and Carranza rose up, and one just started going straight down toward Mexico City and eventually defeated Huerta. But Huerta is not a guy who went like Porfirio Diaz into exile. He did go to exile to Spain, but he didn't stay there. Because a few months later, the rich guys again and Orozco persuaded Huerta to return to the United States and start yet another revolution to try to invade Mexico. They landed up right here in El Paso, Huerta and Pascual. They were arrested here. And they were put to trial, basically, well, through proceedings here in our federal courthouse.
What year was that, Ray?
That was in 1915, in June of 1915. Now, our former mayor, Tom Lee, represented Huerta. And 10 minutes?
20 minutes is up.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. My timekeeper, I got the best timekeeper UTEP has ever had. The opposition wouldn't like the way he keeps time, but he runs our clock magnificently. So anyway, at that point, in 1915, when they got arrested here, but in days, Pascual Orozco escaped. And he went, I could have told him not to go to Van Horn, but that's... I could have told him that bad things happen to you in Hudspeth and Culberson counties, but they didn't listen to me. So he went with 4 guys, basically, that were there in Hudspeth County, which was then El Paso County. It's important to remember. And what happened was that There were Mexicans who were armed, and back in those days, an armed Mexican running loose in that part of El Paso County and in Culberson County was a dead man. So the posse, not knowing why they were chasing them, they accused them of having raided a ranch. Actually, these guys were camping out there, and a ranch hand asked them to go to the ranch because they told them they were hungry. He said, "We'll feed you." So he went to the ranch and he fed them. And other people rode up, and Pascual and his friends rode off. The posse chased them for a day or so, and then they lost them for a while, but they were found asleep, basically, in a mountain, in a canyon, and one man by the name of Dave Allison, a former Texas Ranger, killed all 5 of them. No questions asked. This guy said he bragged that he killed several Mexicans every month. Really kind of a pretty vicious gunslinger with a badge is what I call him. And later, for 100 years, the posse put out a story that Pascual had assaulted the people at the ranch, and they had properly gone after him and killed him in a fusillade. In trying, that's Pascual right there, not in good circumstances. And that's right on the side of the old Culberson County Courthouse. What happened then is they undertook a cover-up. Remember I told you El Paso County was where the chase started? Well, the people, especially the Mexicanos around here, were furious, and they knew, or they felt, that Pascual had been assassinated. So they raised this tremendous controversy. The posse got scared that they were going to get tried here in El Paso and indicted in El Paso for something. So the sheriff went to the Culberson County grand jury, got the whole bunch of them. The entire posse was indicted for Pascual's murder. They held a sham trial.
What sheriff?
Pardon me?
What sheriff did that?
Sheriff Maureen, John A. Maureen. You don't know him. What? The sheriff of Culberson County.
County sheriff.
Right. So anyway, they had a sham trial. All of them were acquitted, which meant that no one thereafter could ever ask any questions. And that was the end of Pascual Orozco. The cover-up worked, and until this book, we didn't find out the truth of what happened. That's true. So I have sent 2 legal bills, one to the Orozco family to tell them that I have them acquitted now of being a robber at that ranch. And I also sent one to the Love family, which they might have deserved it, but they were accused of having murdered Pascual. And it was this one guy who actually confessed to it to other people. He told George Patton and other people that he, in fact, killed all 5 of the Mexicans, okay? That's the story. It's a great story of Pascual Orozco. And his problem is he became so controversial that he and Huerta both were essentially written out of Mexican history. That's why there hasn't been a book on Pascual for 50 years. And there was only one by a fine historian out of Arizona. And no book in Spanish since 1912 for more than 100 years. So there you go. Makes a great Christmas gift too, I must add. Dia de los Reyes or Hanukkah, whichever one you want.
Our second speaker is Clarence Kiki Cooper, and again, somebody who doesn't need an introduction. He taught in the UTEP's physics department for 54 years.
I started when I was real young.
And now apparently is moving over to the history department to join the history faculty. I'm not going to say anything about his wonderful book because I know he'll explain and talk about it, but I just wanted to say something. When I was reading it, one of the first things I noticed is that his father was born in 1878. So we're looking at just 2 generations going over 137 years. I was thinking, if I were going to talk about one of my ancestors who was born in the 1870s, it wouldn't be my father. It wouldn't be my grandfather. It would be my great-grandfather. I mean, this is a really astonishing chronological overview. I mean, this is just somebody who's himself lived a long life, I mean his father, and now we're going to listen to the son who's lived a very long life talk about his father. Okay, thank you.
You know, 1878, I was born in 1934, and so, you know, my father was a little bit ahead of me. He liked to have a family late in life. I'm trying to follow in his footsteps. But Susan, I promised Susan I wouldn't have any more children. But she doesn't trust me, so there's one of those jars that says vasectomy. All right, well, 1978. He was born in Oregon, in a little town called Phoenix. And then he wandered through the casinos in Reno when he was a kid. He learned how to do all the tricks. And then he ended up in Northern California in a big mill at Weed, California. Anybody been in Weed?
No.
All right. Right next to Mount Shasta. And then he stayed there quite a while, learned his trade. But he liked to gamble a lot. I guess he learned from the croupiers at the casino. So one time, after the big quake in San Francisco, he takes off and he plays poker for 2 days and makes $10,000. And he buys a horse. He says, "Oh, this horse is really going to win." So he invests every penny he had on this horse, and he might have won, but except he broke his leg at the starting gate. He never got anywhere. So anyway, he takes off in disgust. He worked for the railroad, and I think that's how I got to Mexico. I'm not sure, because as I say, I was young and he was old. I didn't talk to him very much, and so because Southern Pacific had a branch that went down from Arizona into the Cananea mine, the copper mine. So that's how I think he got to Mexico. Anyway, 1911, for sure. He ends up in Madera, Chihuahua. Okay, it's about 300 miles southwest of here, up in the mountains in Chihuahua. And Ray's grandfather was probably there at the time, and they were living in the company houses. He worked for the same company, and so this whole operation was owned by a guy by the name of Pearson. And Pearson had invested all kinds of money through a Canadian corporation to buy a big mill that belonged to W.C. Green. And I wished I had my slides so I could show you the mill and everything, but I can't. So anyway, it's a huge operation, Madera, Chihuahua. And then he also owned the railroad that came all the way from Chihuahua through the mountains, through Madera, and up to Juarez. Now, the railroad was a very important part of the revolution because Pancho Villa used it to haul his troops. Pascual Orosco didn't, but Jose Inés Salazar did a lot. And of course, when he first came to the battle in Juarez, he rode the train with Madero a little bit. So anyway, Madera, Chihuahua. Pearson decides that he needs another sawmill. Well, he needs another sawmill like he needs a hole in the head because he's already got more production than he can possibly get across the border, because the planing mill was here in Juarez, in El Paso, the finishing mill. So he builds another sawmill in Pearson. Does anybody know where Pearson is?
No.
Pearson is Matortis, where they make the pottery. That used to be Pearson.
Where's that?
It's about 150 miles southwest of here. Yeah, you know where Columbus is, you go straight down from there. It's near Casas Grandes, if you know where that is.
Yeah, I know where Casas
Okay, right close. All right, who builds this new mill? It's my dad. He buys all the equipment. He puts the mill together, and you've got these super giant mills, lumber mills, and and you've got these cities that go along with it. These are fabulous cities. They're the biggest cities in northern Chihuahua. They've got hospitals, they've got pool halls, they've got casinos, they've got, you know, just hotels, everything. They're fabulous towns, Pearson and Madera. All right. Now, what was happening at the time? The revolution. Bad time to start a business in Mexico. And so the revolutionaries liked the train because they could use it to haul their troops. Not only that, but they could raid the stores, both in Madera and Pearson. My dad owned a store in Pearson, and they'd come by and take things. But they were very nice. They left IOUs, you know. IOU, Pancho Villa. So anyway, my dad spent most of his time in Pearson, Chihuahua, which is now Matortis. So let me tell you a little bit about that. You know, the revolutionaries were using the trains, but they burned the bridges behind them so that the federales couldn't use the bridges, so they couldn't get the lumber out. And my dad would ride a little putt-putt thing, and if the bridge was out, they'd tie the rails together. I have some great pictures in the book, and they'd push the putt-putt across these, just the rails hanging into an abyss, you know. So, and the kids along the route, they use the sound of my dad's little putt-putt. It's a little tiny car that you put on the rails. And because he'd throw them candy as he went through town. So they were all there, you know, to greet him. Well, the first rebel that I want to talk about is a guy by the name of Maximo Castillo. How many of you heard of Maximo Castillo?
No.
Well, yeah, he was with Orozco also for a while. And Maximo comes in, you know, he does the standard stuff, you know, steals stuff from the store and so forth. But that night, my dad's sitting on a porch. He just got there late at night, and he has his gun with him. He always carried a gun. He put it on the side table, and he sees these suspicious characters walking up. There's 5 of them. And he says, uh-oh, and he slips a gun in his sleeve. And he goes to the door, and these 2 guys have guns, rifles pointing at his belly. So he says, they say, come with me. And he says, I will oblige. And so he talks to him, and he says, look, there's people, they wanted him to go open the safe at the office. There's people down there. Let's wait until the watchman leaves and all these people leave. We'll go down there. So they had a huddle. They talked it over. They decided to wait. And then after a while, 3 of them went down to check off the office, and he left 2 there. One of them heard a noise in an arroyo. He went down to investigate it. And guess what my dad says? This is my chance. He slips a pistol out, points it at the guy. Click, it misfires.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the guy's pissed. He lunges at my dad with a knife, and he hits him over the head with the pistol, but he's a great big guy. He finally wrestled him to the ground, and just about the time that he got the knife out of his hand, the guy in the gully comes back, and he hits him over the head with the butt of his rifle.
No.
Yeah. And the way my dad put it, he said, I lost interest at the time. I lost it. It knocked the holy crap out of him is what happened, you know. And so, anyway, they beat him up pretty bad. And they went to the office, and then they put a knife across here, and they cut it just to make it bleed, you know, so that maybe he could find some more money. Well, they trashed the place out, and then they said, well, they found a few thousand pesos. They said, okay, we better get out of here. The watchman's coming. So they all, 6 of them, walking down the railroad track, and it's dark. And they've been doing some construction, so one of them steps in a hole and falls, and the other guy's is like a Keystone Cop thing, you know, they all fall on top of this guy, and my dad beats it into the bushes and hides, you know. And these guys were cursing, they're saying, and but he stayed there, and finally they left, and so he went somewhere and took the gag in his hands, you know, and the knife cut, and well, he went home and went to bed. Just another day in Pearson, you know. So, you know, Ray finds this article. This is more of a table. It's from A.B. Fall's Investigation of Mexican Affairs, and it says, C.H. Cooper killed by bandits in 1913. What happened is, I think they translated got cut. His throat got cut. People thought it killed him. But of course, Elliot Shapley called me. He said, "How were you born? Your dad was killed in 1913." Well, let me tell you, he went to see Castillo and he said, "Castillo, what the hell's going on here with your guys?" And he says, "Oh, it wasn't my guys," although he admitted that he didn't have real control over all of his generals and stuff. Now, Castillo appears back in 1914, same guy. Castillo was an interesting character because he did fight with Orozco and he did fight with Madero, and but at this time he was a loose cannon. He deserted Orozco when Orozco went traitor with the Huerta, and he claimed he was a follower of Emiliano Zapata, the northern representative of Zapata. So, here comes a train loaded with passengers. It leaves Juarez, ends up at the highest part of the mountain there, close to Madera. It's called the Cumbre Tunnel. Unknowns to these guys, that were the passenger train guys, some other guy, the rebels had forced another engineer to back an empty stock train into the tunnel. It's about 5/8 of a mile long. They pulled the engines out, left the stock cars, and set it on fire. So here comes this train, smash into the tunnel. And of course, it turned into an inferno, both with heat and with gases from all the stuff that was burning in there. My dad was one of the first guys to go in, and the cover of the book, see, it looks like a spaceman. That's a breather so he could breathe inside this tunnel and try to rescue folks. And he borrowed it from the fire department in El Paso, I think. Anyway, it only allowed him to stay in 15 minutes or so. So he goes in, he walks 150 feet, and there's a brakeman sitting on a rock there, like this. You know, he says, "Wow, I've saved one guy." He touched him like this, and it was like the cartoons. He just crumbled away, you know, completely carbonized. So anyway, I don't know. They don't know how many people perished because they never could find a lot of them, but at least 65, and women and children, the whole works. Well, this was a terrible disaster, and of course, even Villa was sent his regrets. He says, if I find the guy that did this, I'm going to kill him immediately. Well, guess who they thought it was? It was Maximo Castillo. The engineer supposedly had seen him there that night. Two of the brakemen saw the guys put the fire onto the stock cars, and so everybody was looking for Castillo. Castillo was found about a week later across the border by close to Columbus, and he got arrested and he brought to Fort Bliss. And he stayed in Fort Bliss for 2 years. They didn't know what to do with the guy. What are we supposed to do with this guy? If we send him back to Mexico, Villa's going to shoot him on sight. Villa hated him. And, well, good old U.S., you know, they figured out a solution. They sent him to Cuba. So he died in Cuba as old and tired and so forth. But actually, he was quite important in the revolution. He was the chief of Madero's bodyguards, and I had a great picture of that, but I guess I can't show it. Well, anyway, Jose Inez Salazar came through there and did the same kind of thing, you know, shot a couple of Chinese, looted the store, burnt some stuff, and they all did it. And so Salazar came back because my dad went to see him at 2 o'clock in the morning. He says, "What are you doing here? Nobody does this to me." And by the way, Salazar was the one that caused all the Mormon exodus in 1912, and that's probably when your folks left too, Ray. So they talked a while. And he said, "I'm not going to bother your store. I'll leave the food. I'll just take the clothing." And they made a deal. But about 2 months later, Salazar comes by and says, "I want amnesty. I want you, Cooper, to get the amnesty." So Cooper goes into Ciudad Juarez, talks to the consulate, and gets this guy amnesty through President Carranza. Salazar's killed by the ranchers about a month later, so the amnesty didn't do him any. Kind of like what happened to Orozco in a way, you know, but it wasn't the sheriff this time. All right, so the next guy that is important is Martin Lopez. He was one of Pancho Villa's guys. Martin Lopez, General Lopez, comes through, does the standard stuff, goes to the store, kills some Chinese guys. I don't know why Villa hated the Chinese so much. But then he hands Cooper a note for $50,000. He says, it's signed by Pancho Villa. I've got a copy of the note. It says, "Give me $50,000 or I'll burn out the whole place." Well, the company didn't have it. They'd lost tons of money. They couldn't bring the lumber out. So the boss, who was Roy Horde, wrote Villa a letter and says, "Look, we can't pay you. We're broke. And besides that, it's not Cooper's fault. He's just a contractor." And Cooper, when they had the flu of 1918, he saved a lot of people by buying medicine out of his own pocket and stuff. And so anyway, Pancho Villa just forgot it. But it turns out that they did owe Pancho Villa some money, believe it or not. The company, when they burned the tunnel, Villa wanted to get his troops through. So he said, "Look, I'll lend you the money. You build a switchback over the top of the tunnel, and I can use the railroad." So that's what he did. He lent him 1,000,000 pesos, which was a lot of dough in those days. It's 2 to 1 or something like that. So he lent him 1,000,000 pesos. They built the switchback, and he was able to get through. Well, okay. These are some of the characters that my dad ran into. By the way, he also ran into Pershing when he went chasing Villa and that sort of thing. From Pearson, he went down to Durango. He spent a little bit of time in Cloudcroft logging the Mescalero Reservation in 1929. Then he went to Durango. A British company offered him a job down there, so he goes down to Durango, which is about 800 miles in the Sierra. Beautiful place, a big meadow with a creek. And that's where Herbie and I were born, in Durango. And he's trying to get this sawmill going for these Brits. But the problem was they had a little fire soon after he got there, and it burnt the whole town down. And
Durango, Colorado?
no, Durango, Mexico. Go south from here, 800 miles. So anyway, you know, all the townsfolk came out to see this fire, especially the gasoline drums, because they would explode and shoot straight up into the air, you know. And the old man almost committed suicide. He just getting this thing started. So he got all the workers together and said, "We got to get this thing going." And they all worked night and day. They rebuilt this thing. And I wanted to read you a little paragraph. I know I've got, what have I got, 2 minutes?
No, you got as long as you want.
I'm going to keep looking at it. I think Stephen.
Hold this for me. Put it up to my mouth. I want to read you a couple of articles from newspapers, because it's very rare that you can you hear me now? Yeah. That you see a newspaper give credit to a gringo. So I'd like to read you one, especially the one from El Continental here in Juarez. Says, "Not all enterprises are successful, but it happened in El Salto. This article will be too lengthy to expound on all the things that should be appreciated in this place, although It's not a good thing to make comparisons. This one serves as an example. I recently visited a sawmill in Bella Vista, Chihuahua. Do you know where that is, Ray? Bella Vista? No. Okay. Now I lost my place trying to talk to Ray. It's about 300 miles on the Northwestern Railroad. But anyway, in Bella Vista, the worker's life is a misery. Their shacks are full of bed bugs and flies. These people have bodies covered with rags and abandoned by God. Those few of us that worry about the criminal way in which our forests are treated are filled with hope. This is due to the responsibility of the director has for his workers, a hospital with love, technicians using the most recent and conserving the forest. I ask myself, how can an enterprise exist when medical services are given free and a rational, controlled exploitation of the forest exists? Talking about the mill in El Salto, after it came up from the ashes. Many years ago, the mill burned down when it was not running properly. At this time, Cooper just arrived. An American has done for Mexico what few Mexicans have done. As an investment, it seemed absurd to reconstruct it, but Cooper solicited the help of the workers, and like a phoenix, a vibrant operation came out of the ashes, and so forth. He talks about some of the guys that work there, and then he says, and then there's Cooper. From 6 a.m. he sails through the entire operation and dreams about his machines. What a wonderful place, El Salto. There are no bug bites, no flies, no dust. Here there are no lines and even complaints about the government. Too bad we can't make a republic of El Salto. It would be the Switzerland of Mexico. I thought that was a really good article. But anyway, he paid really good salaries. He treated the workers right. When the union came to see him, he said, we need a raise. He gave them a raise. Then the townspeople raised the prices. So he bought wholesale foods and sold them at cost and stuff like that. So he really did a great job in El Salto. He was sort of ahead of his time because this thing ran like a machine. He got Parkinson's, and so he had to quit. But after he had some treatments, he went back to El Salto, and 8,000 people came to see him when he got off the train. And so when they figured he wasn't going to last much longer, the workers gave him a portrait, and I've got it hanging outside here. You might look at a beautiful portrait with the sawmill in the background. And so this is an American that went down in about 1908 and really did well in Mexico. And I'll tell you that the picture of this painting hangs in the Union Hall in El Salto, the only place that I know of where management is at the head of a union hall.
Cool.
That's it.
Let them know we're bringing in the portrait of Mr. Cooper. But Kiki, I have a question for you.
I got a question.
You go first.
Clarence, your father, describe him.
How
old was he when he died?
Oh, he was about my age. Yeah, about 81 or 82.
Describe him physically.
Physically, he looked a little bit like you. I mean, he was husky, pretty strong, yeah. Maybe more like Herbie, yeah. About the size of Herbie, about 5'11", 5'10", something like that.
And when he went to Mexico, did he speak Spanish?
No.
Did he speak Spanish down there? Did he learn Spanish?
Well, I got to tell you a story about that.
Turn to us. Turn to us and tell us.
Is it off?
Yeah.
Oh my, no wonder.
There you go.
He was, I talked to his chauffeur a lot. And so they're driving down this bumpy road, and there's some guys working on the road. And they were having a little shot of tequila at 9 o'clock in the morning. So the chauffeur got out and had a shot, and he said, well, we want to talk to Cooper. He says, well, he can't talk, because you didn't want him to talk to these drunk guys, He says, what do you mean? He talks a lot better than you do. And he said, oh yeah, he talks it, but he doesn't understand a word. So he wasn't real good at Spanish, but he was enough to write business letters and stuff, so that's pretty good.
What color hair did he have?
He didn't have any hair, so I don't know. He was pretty bald.
And how old was he when you were born?
Well, 1878. Subtract 1934 from it, and you can figure it out. But he was over 30.
Yeah.